This first question, I'll probably actually really read the question because there's like a lot of data and facts in there. The rest of it, we will just let the conversation flow somewhat. Hello, and welcome to a new season of At the Podium with me, Patrick Huey. At the Podium is a multimedia platform that brings together people from a diverse background of lives, careers, and experiences who all share one thing in common. They have stepped fully into the transformative power of finding and raising their voices to make an impact on our world today. At the Podium holds a space for everyone to tell their stories, to be heard, and to bring us inspiration. Today, I'm thrilled to share the podium with Derrick Young Jr. and Jonathan Allen, founders of Leadership Brainery. Leadership Brainery is a Boston-based nonprofit addressing inequitable access to master's and doctoral degrees and workforce leadership opportunities for underrepresented talent, including people of color, individuals from a lower socioeconomic status, first-generation and LGBTQ+ individuals. Derrick Young Jr. is a champion for social justice, racial equity, and anti-oppression. He is the co-founder and executive director of Leadership Brainery. He was recently the policy and strategy specialist for intergovernmental relations at the Boston Public Health Commission. At BPHC, he represented the city of Boston on local and state public health coalitions, drafted priority legislation, and prepared the annual operating budget for approval by the City Council. At the coronavirus pandemic outbreak, he was assigned to Boston's Medical Intelligence Center as the information box supervisor. In that role, he provided colleagues, first responders, and local residents with rapidly evolving coronavirus updates. Derrick earned his MPH from Tufts University School of Medicine and his BA from Grambling State University. Jonathan L. Allen is a champion for equity and empowerment. He is co-founder and director of development at Leadership Brainery. Additionally, he is the inaugural innovator in residence at Boston University's Student Innovation Center. Jonathan also recently ran for Boston City Council in the fall 2019 election. Jonathan followed his maternal and paternal grandmother's footsteps and began preaching at age 11 and was ordained at age 20. As a first-generation college student, he became freshman and sophomore class president, junior senator, and student body president of Grambling State University. After receiving his BS in business management, Jonathan worked to expand services for a pediatric day healthcare center for chronically ill children until departing to earn his Master of Theological Studies from Southern Methodist University, Perkins School of Theology. Jonathan is a 2019 graduate of Boston University School of Law, where he was an active leader and served as president of the Black Law Students Association. He was later a fellow at Free Speech for People, research assistant to the Honorable Geraldine S. Hines of the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, research assistant to Reverend Cornell Brooks, who is former president and CEO of the NAACP, and fellow at Harvard's Law School's Charles Hamilton Houston Institute for Race and Justice. Okay, Derrick and Jonathan, welcome to At the Podium.
Thank you for having us. Thank you so much, Patrick.
I am so happy to have you two gentlemen on this video podcast. You have been a significant part of my Boston experience over the past 6 months. And when I first met you, I was so impressed with what you were doing to help the Black community, the LGBTQ community, the underrepresented communities within the educational sphere in Boston.
Thank you. It is a pleasure for us to do this work. We love it. We know it's urgent, it's needed, change can't wait. So we're excited to share some more with you.
So we'll get into what Leadership Brainery is, but I want to just lay the groundwork for the sort of state of Black higher education today and Black education in general. So I was doing a little research online And there is right now so much focus in education that is placed on ensuring that as many children as possible have access to quality pre-K and early education, which is totally appropriate because we know how you start is generally how you end in many cases. There's a lot of focus also being placed on getting kids over the hump of high school graduation. As we move into the undergraduate sphere, those numbers start to dwindle as we look at enrollment for people of color and first generation college students. And even less resources and energy exist for people of color and first generation college students to go into master's and doctorate programs. The Journal of Blacks in Higher Education, and I'm going to read this, they report that Black students make up about 12.7% of college students with only a 42% graduation rate, which is appalling. If it were a business, we would close it. And then the Post-Secondary National Policy Institute reports that in graduate schools, Black people make up about 12% of enrolled students, and only 29% of the Black population between 25 to 29 have a bachelor's degree or higher, compared to 45% of the white population. In STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, Black people only represent 14% of undergrad degrees, 7% of master's degrees, and 5% of doctorates. So in the percentage soup here, at the core of that, what do all these numbers tell us about the state of education for Black people today and for people of color?
What I really feel like the numbers tell us is that for far too long, Black folks and folks with their backs up against the wall who are oppressed, from LGBTQ folks to Latinx to Indigenous people, we have been barred for education for far too long. And we are at a place in our country where a lot of people do believe that we've reached some sense of equality. But when we look at our history and we know that for years, people of color were barred from learning, barred from education, could be jailed if they were even reading, that we have a long way to go to ensure that we catch up from an education perspective, but then also the benefits that education yield us in the employment and professional and generational prosperity perspective as well too.
Yeah, which it also reminds us the role that education plays in the larger system. And as Derrick was just alluding to about the benefits and assets that education yields as it relates to your workforce and career mobility opportunities, which is a direct correlation and connection to then wealth and the economy and how people fare out in terms of building financial stability and generational prosperity. And so if Black and brown folk are struggling, and the data that you pointed specifically focused on Black folk, if Black folk are having that disparity and inequity and imbalance in not only is access to quality education, both at the K through 12 undergraduate, but particularly we focus in our work at Leadership Brainery on the graduate school, the master's and doctoral degree sector, because primarily of the connection it also has to management level and leadership roles in the workforce where higher wages and higher income is being earned for folk in those particular positions, which are connecting and providing the opportunity for greater financial stability for their families and the capacity for them to also be influential in terms of reinvestment in their communities, which is also how we stabilize and really bring about equity and greater opportunity for our communities, certainly as we think about generational prosperity. And that is really key, that we understand the connection that education has to those other outlooks as well.
But I wonder if we're looking at it as a percentage number. Can you make the argument that the percentages are actually right, given that Black people are only 12.3% of the population? And in the undergraduate model, we're indexing at a higher percentage of Black people in undergraduate universities than we are as a percentage of the population. So can one make the argument that we are right on target with where we should be?
A lot of people do make that argument. I would say in the master's doctoral level, we are not at that 12% to reach that equity. And so that's, of course, why we're really focused there. But then when you do look at the college percentages, what I would say is that all of these percentages are based on every college, every university. Of course, education is essential across the board, but we know even at Leadership Brainery, we do focus on a lot of the competitive and top tier universities where we see a lot of those pipelines directly into our most innovative companies, our newest companies, our largest companies. in some of the most influential positions in our country who are really making decisions should change the way that all of us work. We at the master's and doctoral level or at the college level, if we can get more folks into more competitive schools, not saying necessarily that the education is better, but definitely the opportunity and access that it does provide can really open up just transformative opportunities for the communities that we serve.
Yeah,
And I would just say to give an example of that really quickly, sorry, Jonathan.
No, you're okay.
Me and Jonathan went to Grambling State University, HBCU, amazing school in Louisiana. And then we had the opportunity to go to top tier institutions for our master's and our doctoral degrees. And so when I went to Tufts School of Medicine for my master's in public health and health policy, I was the only Black man to enter into my cohort in 2015. That is insane to know that I was in a program, a medical school, where we focused on mostly disparities in underserved communities and inequities. And I was the only person in that cohort who actually came from the communities that we were speaking about and trying to find solutions to help. And it's absolutely impossible to put all our perspectives at the table and really ensure that we're coming up with solutions that are best for the communities that we serve if we're not at the table making those decisions. It was the same when Jonathan went and got his master's at SMU in theological studies. We both went to law school. I actually self-eliminated myself from law school after being one out of two Black men out of my class of 250 students at Boston University. These are all top tier institutions that are funneling these leaders who are making decisions that impact all of us in our country. And we're not there at the decision-making tables, at the training tables.
So Jonathan and Derrick, you're sort of saying that the statistics are sort of flatlining the reality of access.
The statistics and all data must be interpreted and unpacked for context. That one of the contexts that we always discuss is that it's more than just about having the master's degree. It's more than just about having the doctoral degree. It's more than just the education that you even gain or the academic nature of going through those programs. It's also about the connections you build, the networks you then have access to. So that's why it does matter what school you go to, where you go to, what city are you living in, what professional contacts do you now have access to? Because all of that is influencing your prospects, your career mobility, your outlook. And so, yeah, you can just go get a master's degree, but if you didn't meet anybody in the process, if you didn't build a network in the process, then just having the graduate degree isn't the bag, it's having the network that you're really looking to gain. And so that's why it's important that you be strategic and intentional of always remembering the systemic nature of it all. And knowing that the schools that are at the top tier of the rankings, for example, are the ones that companies are prioritizing when they are recruiting to hire talent into their management level and senior leadership roles, particularly the top tier companies, where you are going to earn more and be able to have more accelerated access or a more accelerated pathway to wealth. It doesn't mean that you can't find wealth some other way, that you can't build it. There are tons of examples of people who have never gotten a college degree, who's never gone to graduate school, who have been able to build wealth and prosperity for themselves. So our message is that if you don't have a graduate degree, you can't be wealthy, you can't be prosperous. That's not the message. But the message is that there is a significant number of our society who is in management level and leadership roles who have leveraged the graduate school pathway as an accelerated way to get wealth and to get stability. And Black and brown folk are the minority there. We are grossly underrepresented in those spaces. And so if we do want to accelerate closing wealth gaps in our country, then we have to prioritize graduate professional school as a pathway to do that. Now, it comes with financial considerations around student loan debt and so forth. And so that's why we also have to become very educated and equipped with the tools of how we access scholarships, how we negotiate our financial aid packages, and other different resources that we can leverage to close that debt, as well as to obtain those career opportunities that can help us pay off those debts in a quicker way as well. And so it's a mixture of the tools, right? That's really important that we like to encourage people to really think about and hone in on.
So where all that how does Leadership Brainery function? What is the proposition that Leadership Brainery is making to address all of those true issues, real issues that you just addressed, Jonathan and Derrick?
So I would say Leadership Brainery really has about four main stakeholders that we work with to really ensure that this whole model is working. And that is community members, individuals, that is corporations and employers, those who are in need of this talent, but then also the community is in need of them to build wealth and stability for themselves. Then we work with the academic institutions to ensure that they are properly set up and removing bias and systemic racism from their institutions and their processes. And then lastly, and most importantly, we work with prospective graduate students, those who want to really ensure that they get access to master's and doctoral degrees, and also those who may not be on the path to getting those degrees, and they run into us and we can speak to them about the benefits that they can get with getting a master's and doctoral degrees. And so really ensuring that those four entities are equipped with the tools that they need to solve this overall problem. We want to ensure that the whole ecosystem of higher ed and access to workforce leadership opportunities is being fulfilled. And so we have all four of those stakeholders in our market here at Leadership Brainery.
And we realize that some of the key components that prospective graduate school talent that are coming from underrepresented communities and anybody who really is looking to go down those pathways, what they need are things like mentorship, as well as recruitment opportunities. Exposure is a big one. This idea of what you see and what you are exposed to expands your imagination around what's possible. And so really continue to expose our communities to what's possible, the different pathways that they can take, as well as encouraging them that they have the capacity to get it done. Because too often we are seeing people eliminate themselves from opportunities because they don't believe in themselves. They don't believe that they belong. They don't believe that they have the capacity to get through it. And so also encouraging our communities that you have the capacity, you are brilliant, and you should consider graduate school as a pathway for you and not allow the barriers, the institutional barriers, in fact, in addition to whatever circumstances in our own lives that we may be facing and experiences that may be influencing how we see ourselves, but continuing to encourage us to go after it and to make it happen and to be, to leverage self-efficacy and resourcefulness to figure out how we get it done.
There's an organization called Posse, which is really working on taking kids who are in high school and helping them navigate the course through to an undergraduate program. Exactly. With their groups of friends, their posses. I think where my mind, when I first started interacting with the organization, which I was not aware of, it was my own ignorance, is that I assumed that a person who was already achieving in an undergraduate program would have a natural pipeline to a graduate program or a doctorate program, which shows my own bias from my own background. So what you're telling me is that a person oftentimes still needs that extra help, that extra nudge, that extra support as they're making that transition from undergrad into a graduate program or doctorate program. And you're asking that person to be potentially mentored by other people who are within the program or who have made that transition. And then you're also asking the universities to educate themselves about what those students will need once they come through the process of getting into a graduate or doctorate program.
I had a student a few weeks ago who came and they shared, nobody's talking to me about graduate school. Like nobody on my campus, none of my professors, the career services, they only talk about jobs and connecting us with employers. And so Leadership Brainery, when I interact with you all, are the only entity in my life that's continuing to talk about graduate school. And so we know that when it comes to graduate school, because in our communities, we do have a lack of access to them, that a lot of folks in our families are not talking about graduate school with our families. We're like, hey, we got to go get a job. We need to go graduate college, and then we need to start making some money. And so a lot of people think about graduate school as extra because it does take extra time. It does take extra money that oftentimes we don't have. We do work with that talent to ensure, hey, yes, you've made it through college, but the graduate school process is completely different. It's much more competitive. It's much more research-based. You do really ensure that you need to have work experience that you can leverage when applying. opposed to college. They're really focusing on your extracurriculars or your grades in high school. But when you're applying to graduate school, you really have to hone in on what type of experience did you have, whether that was internships or work experience. You may have to conduct interviews, your personal statements, your diversity statements, your addendums, they all look much different. And so having someone that can speak with you and say, hey, do you even know what a diversity statement is? That's not something that most people write in undergrad. And so to know that, hey, these universities are looking to what diverse perspectives will add to our cohort that we bring in, and there are additional statements that you can submit, because when we do read one statement from a Black person, typically there may be some bias. So you want to give them as much information as possible. So we encourage all our students to submit all 3 statements. If they allow you to do a video, do a video. Make sure you do informational interviews before you apply. The people at the university need to ensure that they know you, so that when they're reading your application, they can speak from that lived experience in addition to that written experience that you're speaking with them about. And a lot of people are just not thinking about the holistic process. You don't have to do all of that to get into graduate school, but if you really want to ensure that you can get into competitive graduate schools, that you can get a competitive financial aid package, that you can have a network and influence once you do get into that institution, it takes a lot of intentionality. It takes a great application. And we just want to be sure that people are not only set up to apply and maybe get accepted, but they get accepted, they get financial aid, and that they have a really great experience once they get there too.
So Derrick, you're talking from the student side of what you're doing to prepare the students.
Exactly.
Jonathan, what kind of conversation are you having with the universities to prepare them for these students who may be applying and then joining their various graduate and doctoral degree programs?
One of the initial and prioritizing conversations that we're certainly having is about the long-term commitment that institutions must have to building relationships with our communities in particular, getting away from this transactional return on investment mentality that many of them are operating after. You know, you really think about what is happening. We're thinking about something that has been developing over centuries in this country. The fact that Black people have been barred from quality K-12 education since the very beginning, not having access at all to universities, to colleges. And then this idea of graduate professional school has totally been, just far out of reach for our communities. We have made significant progress, we would say, or movement around the K-12 situation, which we realize our communities are still under invested in, under resourced, under supported, and that is connecting or contributing to high school dropout rates, the lack or underrepresentation of Black people in college to begin with as well. People say it's on par, but I think it's nuanced, and especially when you throw in factors around then what our graduation rates are. And so just because we got in, but if we weren't graduating, then that's not progress. That's not what we're talking about in terms of building equity. And so it takes our systems and the entire institutions to not only then work to get us in, but then to also to retain us while we're there, which there are so many different factors that contribute to many students from Black communities not making it through their undergraduate and their graduate programs. It is all of these other factors with what they're dealing with and balancing at home, oftentimes having to work full-time jobs to be able to stay afloat, while many of their more affluent or white counterparts have other resources that allow them to be able to be cool during situations of hardship. Many of them having to take care of their families. They're being the providers for their families often. These are the compounding circumstances that many students who are Black are navigating, certainly, and especially if they're coming from low socioeconomic status. And so it's really important that we be focused on this. And these are some of the things that we really talk through and train our schools around, even to the extent of which being prepared to deal with students that are coming from HBCUs. How do you build relationships with these communities? How do you communicate with these communities? What resources do you need to invest in your institutions to ensure that you can do that effectively? Too often we're running into institutions that talk about not having diversity budgets for recruitment or for student relations that are large enough to properly support these communities. That's a problem. The fact that you even need a diversity budget, a separate budget to support these communities to begin with, and that's not baked in and prioritized within the larger budget. But if we're going to itemize Black and Brown communities engagement, then we need to make sure that we're prioritizing the investment in those line items to begin with. And so all of those are things that we discuss fiscally. What does it really take to invest in communities before they get to our institutions and while they're at our institutions? And I would even say even after they have left our institutions, because the alumni phase of a person's experience at an institution is critical. It's super important as we think about their professional development.
You know, in theory, I 100% agree with your assessment of what the universities should be doing to attract, retain, and support post-grad students of color, LGBTQ students, first-generation students. But you said it earlier, institutions are about education and it's big business for them. They want the ROI. Mm-hmm. What is the benefit for a university to make that investment?
You know, I think there's a huge benefit, not only in the education institution itself. You know, I think that's where we got to get out of it. Yes, it's a business, but it's unfortunate that education is now a for-profit business, right? We all deserve education. We all deserve access to information so that we can be able to make decisions that better impact us in our societies. And so schools have to think beyond the ROI and say, okay, well, yes, we may be taking higher risks by admitting more folks who need loans. But then you have these endowments where you could help them and support them financially so that that risk is lowered and you're not honestly losing out on too much money. But then also when it comes to the perspectives in the classroom, and that's where we really hone in on, like education is not limited to that institution and once you leave, it just disappears. Education is connected to our overall landscape as humans. And if we really want to ensure that our governments, that our companies, that our communities are navigating from an equitable lens, or navigating from a knowledgeable lens, that we know has happened in our history, that we are kept up with what's going on, that we can articulate that we can understand that and the nuances, then we'll have a better society. And academic institutions have a social responsibility to ensure that our society is equipped and set up to really make sure that everyone can thrive. And so when we restrict certain folks from access to this education, that is really opening up massive doors for a lot of people, you have a ripple effect in our entire society that is on you and that you are responsible for, and honestly should feel really bad for. You know, when we look at our academic institutions and we look at even the connection to slavery, our academic institutions had a big part in the slave trade, and they need to admit that. We need to have some sort of reparations in our institutions. There are a lot of institutions that already give free tuition to Indigenous people, rightfully so, and we need to continue that when it comes to Black people and even LGBTQ people in our communities.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
I think that's so important because I think it's right. It is the right thing to do. And a lot of people say, well, the world of capitalism is not about the right thing to do. But at some point, we have to recognize the extent to all of our decision making is connected to some belief that we have. And thereby, we need to then check our beliefs as it relates to what matters to us, what we care about, and thereby what we prioritize. And if people not having equitable access to opportunity, if people not being able to live out their wildest dreams don't matter to us, and if we will allow ourselves to act as if every year before 2022 has not existed and has not occurred, we are essentially committing ourselves to a perpetuated caste system, a perpetuated oppression, to continuing to have Black and Brown communities backs up against the wall. We are committing ourselves to doing that if we don't want to recalibrate our system. But in addition to it being an ethic, being a moral concern, it also is a business case. The market is saying that we want more diversity. And so for me, it doesn't make sense for us to say we want more diversity, but we won't do what it takes to be more diverse, which, I'm so grateful that Derrick had raised a point the other week that to achieve diversity, which is the balloon, you have to have equity, which must be the root. And so we have to prioritize it. And I feel as if the business case that has been made around DE&I, diversifying our institutions, has led with diversity. And so equity has been prioritized and kind of stagnated in the background. And then we've added it to the acronym, and we're using the word equity, but we're not prioritizing equity. If we are prioritizing equity, then this era must be all about equity, and so that we can get to the era where we celebrate diversity. We should actually take a moment to say, okay, well, let's stop talking about diversity as the thing that we're doing, and really talk about equity as the thing that we're doing.
But do you think that the diversity conversation is very comfortable for people because you can talk about diversity?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Results of diversity.
That's why it is still, this is much so a moral imperative. That's why our hearts do matter. That's why what we believe and what we are committed to matters. Because if we really want to see Black and brown communities liberated and walking in prosperity, then that means we have to prioritize equity. So if you're going to choose instead to prioritize the facade of diversity, then you're not serious. You're not doing what you're professing you're doing.
Exactly. And I honestly just think equity and diversity are two different definitions. And depending on your definition of diversity, you can be extremely diverse in perspective and thought, even in income level. Say you have this company who is claiming that they're diverse, and they do have Black folks, they do have Indigenous folks, they do have Latinx and white folks, but all of them come from generational wealth. All of them come from high education, master's, doctoral levels, and so forth. Yes, that is diverse, but that's not equity. And that's where, to your point, Patrick, that's where people run away from. Because when you talk about equity, then you are committed to uplifting those with their backs up against the wall. So that is investment, that is vulnerability, that is access.
My question is also about, and a few weeks ago, we were at a conference, a talk, Jonathan, that you were hosting at BU, when there was a representative from Mayor Wu's cabinet there. And the question about progress versus movement came up.
Mm-hmm.
And that sort of ties into what we're talking about today, because I feel like there has been a lot of movement for the Black community around education in general, but also as we're looking at moving into higher levels of education in the graduate and the doctorate programs. But where is the real progress? Is there real progress? And I ask that because I wonder if we have the fortune of having Martin Luther King Jr. sitting on this phone call, and Malcolm X sitting on this phone call, and Harriet Tubman sitting on this phone call, would this conversation today be frighteningly familiar to them? That we are discussing how we as Black people can build wealth and equity in America?
I would say you named all those people, and who we put on the pedestal the most, rightfully so, is Dr. Martin Luther King. Dr. Martin Luther King got his doctoral degree from Boston University here, and he leveraged that doctoral degree to make change all around the world. He is an example of our theory of change, that when folks get access to networks and education, that they can make movements and really change the landscape, not only for themselves, but for everybody else.
And we have to stay focused on getting the progress, seeing that the outcomes that we seek come to fruition. Often in conversation, we get trapped in the semantics of everything. That was something that Dr. King and I believe it was Stokely Carmichael, that they were feuding about. It was if the fierce urgency of now, and some of the getting on top of my head, some of the slogans certainly that Dr. King went by versus Black Power, which was the slogan of Stokely Carmichael, and they didn't agree that was what the language should be. And they're fighting against each other about what we should be saying quite often, but they're feeling the same thing. I think that our measurement of if we're making progress or just moving should really be based on how much we've come together. Are we more divided or are we more unified? Because that is what we're going to need to continue to drive equity forward, unification, us coming together across our various backgrounds, beliefs, perspectives, experiences, us realizing that we need each other. We're interrelated, we're interdependent, we're interconnected, and that it takes us coming together. We're better together, in fact, and that it takes that community, that Ubuntu, for us to be able to really see the change through. One of our greatest challenges is division, discord, because that as long as we are separated, the more vulnerable we are to the enemy and to defeat. And so, and you can take that enemy word literally, figuratively, spiritually, however it relates to you. But certainly those things that seek to be against the values that make us better, like love, peace, justice, dignity.
I do think that Black people specifically are making progress in our communities because we are staying committed.
So are you saying, Derrick and Jonathan, that the question around progress versus movement, motion, is not a real question? That it's a more nuanced understanding of what it means to be a Black person throughout the history of America? Is that the position you're taking on this?
Whether you're talking about civil rights, whether you're talking about women's rights, whether you're talking about LGBTQ rights, we're seeing right now in our Supreme Court that these things go back and forth, up and down all the time. And we just have to continue to ensure that we're committed. And as long as we're committed, I think that we are making progress. It's a lot of Black people still in the street every single day, putting their life on the lines to make sure that other Black people are liberated. And we need to make sure that our allies are doing the same.
Jonathan?
Yes, after you've asked yourself whether or not you've made progress or not, that's not really the answer that's going to make a difference. It's then asking yourself, what does it take to make more progress and the progress that needs to be made? And am I committed to doing that? And go and do it. Always being in a state of action is super important. You know, reflection is critical, certainly to developing wisdom. And so, yes, in the process, always reflecting, asking yourself those important questions to make sure that you are checking where you are and on par with where you need to be going, but also being committed to ever being in a state of forwardness, a state of action, to actually apply pressure to accomplish what it is we're trying to accomplish. And that's liberation, that's prosperity, that's joy for people who for too long have had their backs against the wall. That's love abiding and bringing us together, no matter what we may see and what we may feel in terms of the moments in our history and in our society in which we have these bold exhibitions or examples of hate show themselves through. We can't allow that stuff to cause us to become fearful, so to where we become paralyzed and not moving. We got to keep going. We got to keep holding on to hope. Hope is what's going to drive us forward, no matter what's in front of us.
Jonathan, in 2019, you ran for Boston City Council. What did you learn in that process?
I learned that information is so powerful and that it is one of the key tools that make or break someone's access to a better quality of life. And we really focused on, in our campaign, we had an information justice focused campaign because we really believe that with greater access to information and resources that people can leverage it to access the opportunities that really would increase their quality of life. And it influences what they know and what they don't know. And what you know and what you don't know impacts who you know and who you don't know. And then that impacts what you got and what you don't have. and that is what our communities are experiencing. By the way, Derrick was my campaign manager. And so you see, we kind of do everything together for sure. And one thing that we created were community cards. And this community card had on it information about what the city council did. So because we know that so many people that we met didn't even know what the city council was or who their city councilor was and what their responsibilities were. And so we educated them around their role in informing the city's budget or approving the city's budget, their role in recommending policies, their role in being the liaison between them and the government, particularly around accessing resources and services. And so we educated the community, and we gave over 5,000 of those cars away to our community. And so we're just so proud, though we did not advance, that we were able to raise even the conversation up to a greater level of equity that made equity a very important topic for even the other campaigns, the other candidates to be talking about.
You referenced this a little bit in your answer, Jonathan, and Derrick, you alluded to this earlier. Both of you have worked tremendously well within the systems of government, within the systems of these institutions, and you've both achieved so much. Do we need agitation outside of these systems to move our cause for Black people, Latinx people, LGBTQ plus people, first generation students forward? We all three are highly credentialed. We have all lived within the right spaces, you could make an argument. But do we need that force that's from without that? Where is our Stokely Carmichael?
Most definitely, like we said earlier too, we definitely do not believe that everyone should or want to get a graduate or professional degree. If not for the activists on the ground who decided not to go to college, who decided to stay in the community, learn the community, be educated by the community, about the concerns, about the needs, about how we navigate as a culture, we would not be able to do what we're doing. So it does take a village. It takes all of us. It takes, when we go into the university, it's much different because, a lot of the other students, at least when we were there, they would go, they would talk to the professors, but we're making sure that we are building communities with the janitorial staff, with the cafeteria workers, and they became our communities. We go over their house, they would come over ours, we would go out together. And next thing you know, one of the daughters of one of our close friends that we met there, we're talking to her about graduate school. Now she just graduated with her master's degree. And so still being able to set up that generational wealth and build community with all people is essential. We can all learn something from each other. And I think that's what we continue to fail to learn in our country, is the benefit that we all gain when we just sit down and have a conversation. Jonathan shares all the time, more so from a theological perspective. If we want to know more about God, then we need to spend more time with what God has created. And that is people, that is the community, that is the universe, that is nature. The more we can spend time with each other, the more we'll know about God, if that is the aim for you. And so for us, we do benefit significantly from engaging everyone in our communities. And if not for some of the folks with their backs up against the wall, if not for the trans folks who are out here being barred from every single opportunity that they try to get in front of, we know the LGBTQ rights and everything that we benefited from would not be the case. And so it takes a village for sure.
It takes a village. And I posed the question, aren't we able to be even more impactful? Can we be even more dynamic? Can we make even more progress if we learn to work within and without? Do we have to limit ourselves to one space, one sector, one domain? And so what we do is very much so interconnected. We work within and without. We're not limited at all within government or within the political space or within academia. We are through and through it all. We are in culture. We are in spirit and soul. We are addressing these issues on so many different levels and from so many different angles. And in fact, for those people who are going to go into institutions and work even maybe within government, for example, we encourage folks to think about how do they enter in with a sense of somebodyness. Because we need people in those spaces that are activating them, transforming them, providing insight and perspective that help evolve them. And so it's within and it's certainly without. And it's critical that we understand that if those of us who are concerned with social transformation, that we have to continue to develop self-awareness, social awareness, and spiritual awareness, which I truly believe is really critical for those of us who are called to lead at the intersections of life.
I want to switch gears a little bit because I think a really unique and beautiful facet to this story and this community that you're building around Leadership Brainery is the fact that you two have had an incredibly well documented relationship. You posted a proposal video that got over almost 250,000 views on YouTube. So there was something, and I watched the video last night, which was beautiful. And knowing you two, it only resonated more deeply for me. That being said, we know that there's still a great deal of work that needs to be done around same-sex anything in the Black community. How have you two navigated this within your own families and your own lives?
Yeah, no, great question. I would just start off by saying we actually had about 12 million views across the board.
Wait a minute. I didn't see 12. Wait a minute.
So the quarter is just on our personal YouTube. But on the other platforms that we were actually on it was much more beyond that. And so, you know, I say that only because, you know, to give information to my next statement, is that we do have a very long way to go. And because we were able to attract folks all over the world because they saw two Black men in love should not be a thing, honestly. You know, that should be the norm. Like, we should be able to see Black men and men in general in love and it not be a viral thing. And it was a great experience for us. I definitely want Jonathan to speak to his personal experience, but I would say I came out at a rather younger age, at 16. It was definitely difficult in my family with my father and my mother in navigating that process. And I ended up going away for college to Louisiana because I did want to detach myself a bit from everything that I was experiencing when I came out. But I would say it took time, and my family has come to a place where they do embrace me, they do love me, they love Jonathan so much. And it's still difficult because what I never want anybody to do, my family or anyone else, or all those millions of people who did watch our video and fell in love, is to tokenize us and to say, I love them. I love what they're doing in life. I love everything they represent. I love how they look. And so they're okay. And that all of our other LGBTQ folks still out here struggling. And just because they navigate life differently and however they come about in their personality, that we still oppress them and talk about them and don't give them opportunity and don't give them respect. And we want to just ensure with our story that we do embody love and we share that hate. Even though we do experience a lot of hate, we also experience a lot of love, and we want to take that love piece and spread it out to other folks so they can know that not only will we let those negative feelings that always come towards us grow and dwell. And so we're going to put out love no matter what. And then you see from us that we are humans, that we do have feelings, and that we just want the best for everybody. And we hope that everybody can treat us the same in that way.
It has been a transformative experience for us to learn about other people's experience. And it has had an impact on our families, for sure. I grew up in Lufkin, Texas. I was born in Lufkin, Texas, and moved to Dallas when I was in elementary school, and then to Louisiana when I got to high school. And so I have roots in those spaces, both Louisiana and Texas. And both of my maternal and paternal grandmothers are ministers. And that's always been the case, at least since I was a child, since I was born. And so that's how I grew up with them as, I would say, my original mentors. It was my grandmothers. Those were my original mentors. And they have played such a profound role in my life and in how I came to understand the world and the way that it functioned, particularly in introducing me to the church. And my parents were involved in my introduction to the church too, for sure. But my grandmothers have certainly been the most consistent throughout my life, and certainly particularly even in the roles, the authoritative roles that they play in the church as ministers in particular. And the family then looks up to them as our guide and leaders in that regard. And so that was the dynamic for me. I started preaching when I was 11 years old. I was licensed at the age of 14. I was ordained at the age of 20. my entire life growing up for sure. Me as a young minister was the focus. That is what I understood and about my future in terms of me being a world traveling evangelist. I thought that's what my focus is. And I still think that my life has evolved. Certainly since I've come out, the church stopped calling me to come preach. And certainly my preaching, me traveling and speaking, that was my livelihood, significantly so. And so that was a shift in my life. And I was in my first year of law school when that shift really took hold. I was in the process since 2014-ish, really starting to more fully begin accepting. The process that started before then. Certainly when me and Derrick first got together, it really, I really began to think more intentionally about, well, wait, what is my future going to be like? Who am I? What am I? What's my role? What's my purpose on this earth? Just really starting to ask those questions more intentionally and consistently. And after going to theology school at SMU, which I thought initially was supposed to be me going there to become a better preacher, it really was me becoming more of myself, me understanding and asking the question critically, who is God? And really beginning to unpack that and understanding God to be someone that and something that is more loving, more just than our human capacity can even conceive, and knowing God to be more loving than I had understood God to be, and understanding more about historical context and the formation of religion as an institution and as a major player in society's structure and infrastructure. And so with that understanding I gave myself permission to love myself more. I gave myself permission to understand God in that more expansive way, and thereby begin to embark on the journey of being able to tell family and friends that this is who I am. Although I do believe that people who identify as LGBTQ plus or anything that's different, from what mainstream or from what straight people consider to be mainstream or the norm. I do think that folks shouldn't have to do that. They shouldn't have to come out. They shouldn't have to tell everybody about their business or about what they like and don't like in that regard. But hey, that's the journey that many of us are still finding ourselves having to take to find, to gain some sense of authority and autonomy in our lives, so that we don't feel as if we're having to hide or we're just living behind masks, which was certainly the case for me and Derrick when we first got together, and for me, all of until that time, and Derrick too for some time, living DL down low, and that's the experience that so many people in this world have, not being able to be their most authentic selves in that regard, especially as it relates to if they love someone who might be of the same sex.
Why is it that this is such a flashpoint within religion, this idea of homosexuality, people who love each other who are of the same sex? It seems like I've always wondered why it becomes this huge event within the religious world.
There's just so much self-interest and people's own journeys that are wrapped up in decision making. And for a very long time, we have operated off of a society that has marginalized somebody, that has othered somebody in order to create power for somebody. And that is what we're experiencing. Women have experienced it in their own regard. I mean, literally, for all of this time, they have been othered in some capacity. People who are poorer are othered in a capacity. And so I think ultimately it's about control, and it's about power and influence in a way that keeps it harnessed among a particular few, a type of demographic. And unfortunately, labels help us create greater structure in society. When we are able to label a thing as either good or bad, we're then able to influence people's thinking on how to treat it and how to respond and interact with it. And so I think that's at the core and the foundation of what's really happening. Why gay people are the ones that are categorized and labeled in the way that they are, I think has to deal with other considerations as we think about reproduction. Think about that from a control mindset and perspective. So there are all of these different dynamics that lead to money, that lead to control, that lead to capitalism, and power, that really influence or answer the question, why did they choose that group? Why did they choose that group? Same as it relates to women and biases against women about their ability to be powerful. All of these different dynamics, I believe, are at place. And I mean, we can go deep and we can unpack religion and debates around religion and power in that way, and forms of government, and where we will be in the years to come, because clearly we are seeing that our society is evolving more and more and more. Where we are now, we will not be in the decades to come. And I'm proud to see women take on another level of power and autonomy in their lives, even in the midst of their rights being challenged and curtailed back. We are seeing that there is always this ebb and flow.
And I would say that religion has played a huge part in just how we navigate as a society, and especially our government, right? And so when we think about America and the way our Constitution was formed, the premise definitely was religion in most countries around the world. And we decided to take a few pieces like same-sex loving people and abortion and those things, and really institutionalize those also within our laws in our country. And so beyond the folks who were interested in just going to church and being a part of Christianity or some other religion, now you had folks who did not affiliate themselves with religion still saying that this is wrong. And so it created this more just overall in general mindset that being gay or getting an abortion is wrong, because the government also held that up. There's so many other things in the Bible, like eating shellfish or going to church every Sunday, that the government didn't make law, right? And so people are just like, oh, well, if you don't do that, then it's okay. But these things that the government decided to adopt from religion and also embed that in our society, that just have made overall society say, hey, this is wrong.
I think what you say, Derrick, is really an interesting perspective. I think we are in a very interesting time as it relates to people's rights around their bodies, around whom they choose to love. We are in almost a dual world where as we progress as a society, we are actually often experiencing the pull back to a different time,
right,
as we try to move forward. And I think the struggles of all of these different groups is not separate. Mm-hmm. Because as we choose to move forward as a society, as a country, as a world, there will be forces that attempt to thwart that. How we treat everyone, how we treat each other is reflected in how we treat the marginalized, the unseen, the invisible. Right. And I think we are experiencing that in real time right now.
I think that's real. And I just think that people have to continue to recognize the reality of what's at hand. Like, even when we think about forces that may be fighting against a group of people who believe a certain way, like those forces are other people. They're other people who have lived experience, who have their lives and their interests at hand, no matter how progressive or conservative they might be in nature. And I think that's super important. And I think on its face, we have to realize how many people there actually are in the world, and how those different people have different lived experiences. And we have groups among those different people, some groups larger than others, and some with different resources and tools than others. And that is all influencing how they navigate the world. And so when we do see society shift in a certain direction, that's because a particular idea has resonated with enough people that they've mobilized around it, and they've then been able to start shifting policy in that direction. What that means is that another ideal can take flight and gain enough traction among enough people. And some of those people who it gains traction with can technically be among the group who were a part of the other movement we saw happening. It just depends on it could be something very simple that they resonate with that could make them then support this other policy. And we're like, well, how are you supporting that policy yesterday, but you're supporting this policy today? It's because there was something about that particular idea that resonated with them. It could be the most simplest thing that they haven't even necessarily always given thought to the long-term implication of a particular policy. They just resonated with a sect of it. And the way in which they get energized around it could be more than just they read the policy. It could actually be something as simple as the right person came up to them with the right energy, the right personality, and with the right message, and it convinced them, fired them up. They didn't even take the time to read everything else that the person was proposing to them. And that is what changed their mind or got them on board with a particular idea or policy. It's that nuance. It's that specific as it relates to how we see society evolve and shift and shape over time.
Do you all own the role model status?
Say more.
Good question.
You're in a situation where you've had 12 million views of your proposal. And I think you're right to say that if we weren't in the situation we were in, there would not be 12 million people interested in two men proposing to one another.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that you two are the poster children for what could be a heteronormative view of what a couple looks like. That can make it very palatable to people who may not necessarily think it's the right thing to do.
Right.
I also think too that if I were a young, Black, gay person, I would look up to you, I would see that video, and I would say, oh, that's possible. And that I can have love like that. And that I can have relationship with another human being like that, that isn't tainted with the tar of wrong, sin, you're going to hell, you are outcast in society. You all, with that statement of that video, become a beacon for hope. And I'm just asking if you are comfortable with that moniker attached to you.
You know, I feel like we have for a very long time had a lot of people who looked up to us. And so, you know, when the video went viral, we did have a lot of outreach, people from all over the world. That's why we started actually our YouTube channel, where we did our series of bedroom to answer some of those questions from people who were reaching out to us, because it was a lot. We were getting a lot of emails, a lot of DMs, just for folks saying, oh my goodness, I've never seen this before. I want this. Like, can you all support me? If I was to come out, I'll be jailed in my country. If I was to come out, my parents will abandon me. What should I do? And so we tried to address that. It was difficult. We know that we can't address everything. We do try to offer our story. We don't give relationship advice. It's one thing that we've committed to, because everyone's relationship is much different. You know, I would just say it wasn't too much from us. Sometimes, no, I don't think it's ever overwhelming, honestly. You know, we're leadership Brainery. And so it's great that folks can look at us as role models, as leaders. I think we've spent our life really ensuring that people can lean on us, but also that we have a community to lean on, because that's also important when it comes to leaders. But I don't have an issue with it. Jonathan, how do you feel?
I don't have an issue with anyone looking at to me as a role model. I think that it is wonderful that people can leverage what we are experiencing in our lives as a source of inspiration and hope for their own lives. I think what we do try and be very aware of and conscious of is that people are still, when they do witness something on social media, when we think about the proposed video and the millions of views that it received, that's on different platforms. That's not all on YouTube. That's on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, all of these different, that's through private channels where we've learned that the video and other content has shown up. And
parties,
so
people have told us that they've had watch parties, like to watch our video. We're like, whoa, like that's incredible.
So we understand that, you know, people are engaging with us in so many different ways, so many different capacities. And what we really try to be mindful of is the extent to which people interpret us and make assumptions about us based on that very limited experience. Most of you are not engaging with us on a daily basis, have no idea what it's like to be us or go home with us or work with us. And so we understand that then your interpretation about who we are and how we are is based on a very sliver of content and information.
What has the journey been for you both to find your voice as individuals and as a couple? And what do you want to say with this immense platform that you have?
You know, I would say that when I first met Jonathan was already a very high profile individual. He was speaking everywhere. Everyone knew him. He was a minister. And so at that time, we weren't out. And so I definitely don't think that folks compared us at all. But we have seen, and we think it's quite unfair that because we are two men, a lot of people pin us against each other in terms of like who's more popular or who's done this or who's done that. But in heterosexual relationships, people don't do that. They're just like, oh, they expect that the man is supposed to be doing all of these great things and the woman is supposed to be submissive, all of that. But with us, it's just like always this power struggle that people try to pin us against each other with. And I would say that Jonathan also is older than I am. And so over time, through my experiences, as Jonathan navigated like graduate school, a doctoral degree before me, and it's like, okay, you know, that's great. You're building that community, that network, and that voice. I've definitely trailed behind and created a voice of my own. And now we have leadership branding. We've always worked together. And so we have a joint voice, but then we're doing things individually that I'm really proud of both of us. I'm really proud of Jonathan and everything he's accomplished. I'm really proud of everything that I've been able to do over the last few years. And so I think collectively, when we bring together our joint voice, when we bring together our individual voices, our individual expertise, I feel like it's quite unstoppable. We're young. We were talking about this morning, like Jonathan's turning 32 this year. I'm turning 29 this year. We've been able to do some incredible things in our lives, see some amazing things, connect with some amazing people. I'm really excited about the voice that we have in 10 years, the voice that we have in 20 years, and being able to sit back down with you, Patrick, and have those discussions on how things have changed over time.
Yes. And I echo all of that and just would only add that I feel that this journey of cultivating our voice, we've been able in the last few years, I believe, to hone in on being our most authentic selves and not trying to please or perform for anybody. And I think that's been really, really important for us because, you know, when you are in positions of influence where people are looking to you, you feel the need to put on for everybody else, to measure up to their expectations of you. And while there's a lot to be grateful for sure, in having the influence and having the opportunity to lead in that way and in those capacities, or having people look to you, there's enormous pressure that comes with it, responsibility even that comes with it, and we've worked really hard to begin balancing out the expectations of people versus the expectations that we have of ourselves. And I think that's really important. And I'm so grateful and so excited that we're honing that voice, that authentic voice more and more and more. And I'm excited for how even more bold we will become in expressing ourselves and telling our stories even more without the worry or potential fear of what people are going to think about us, how they're going to respond. Are they going to support us in what we're doing over here because of what they think about what we're doing over there? all of these different dynamics. I'm just really I'm grateful for our commitment to continue to become more and more wise, more and more mature each and every day.
Well, I have to say that what you all are building here in Boston and the work that you're doing is inspirational. And the work of your relationship as professionals, as partners, as human beings, it's right. And I think that needs to be said. I want to thank you both for making time to be with me today. It's such an honor to have you both on. Your wisdom is inspiring and is uplifting. So thank you guys. Thank you both so much.
Thank you so much, Patrick. And you are incredible. From the day we met you, we were like, where has he been all of this time? You are a light to so many people. Your spirit is so pure. When people come into contact with you, there is no doubt about what your intentions are. And so I think that's really powerful and profound. And we're honored to be your friend and to be your friends and to be on your platform today and supporting you in this way. And thank you for giving us the opportunity to share our story, for giving the opportunity for so many to share their stories. And we continue to wish you nothing but the best as you continue to go out and give the world your gifts.
I really echo all that, Patrick, and you are incredible. Thank you for this opportunity. And, I'll just end by sharing a quote from one of my favorite folks, also my birthday twin, James Baldwin. And James Baldwin says that not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And that's a model that we hold dear. And we hope that everyone that hears about Leadership Brainery and the work that we're doing to create more generational prosperity and wealth for underserved communities through advanced education resonates with you. And that you join our mission, that you follow us on socials, that you donate, that you spread the word when you interact with people, to know that this is a resource for them, but that also that all of us will benefit from the work that we're doing, whether we are having more diverse attorneys, more diverse doctors, more diverse Patrick Hueys, all of that. We need more of us in these platforms doing these amazing things, sharing our stories. And so again, thank you, Patrick, and I look forward to next time.
Change can't wait.
Yes, change cannot wait. And thank you guys. Thank you so much. Guys, go to leadershipbrainery.org to learn about their mission. And it's truly a mission. And it's changing the world, literally one life at a time. Before we go, as I always say, remember, we all have a voice. Use yours wisely. Thank you, Derrick. Thank you, Jonathan.